My name is Jhon, and welcome back to Plane Crashed, the channel where we uncover the most haunting and unforgettable moments in aviation history. Today, we dive into the skies that turned silent, where hope turned into horror, and where mistakes, fate, and tragedy collided thousands of feet above the earth. These are not just numbers or headlines. They are stories of courage, chaos, and lessons carved in the wreckage of time. From the smoke-filled runways of Tenerife to the shattered skies over Japan, we revisit the 5 deadliest air disasters the world will never forget. It was a calm Sunday afternoon on March 27, 1977, when the island of Tenerife, known for its scenic beauty and quiet beaches, became the site of the deadliest aviation disaster in history. The day began like any other at Los Rodeos Airport, a small regional airfield nestled in the Spanish Canary Islands. No one could have predicted that within hours, 2 Boeing 747 jumbo jets, the largest and most advanced airliners of their time, would collide on that very runway, leaving 583 souls dead and forever changing aviation safety. The tragedy unfolded not because of a single mistake, but because of a devastating chain of human errors, miscommunications, and circumstances that spiraled beyond control. It all started when a terrorist bombing incident earlier that day forced the temporary closure of Gran Canaria Airport, diverting dozens of flights to Tenerife's small and overcrowded Los Rodeos. Among those diverted were KLM Flight 4805, a charter flight from Amsterdam carrying 248 passengers, and Pan Am Flight 1736, arriving from Los Angeles with 396 people on board. The airport, never designed to handle such heavy traffic, was quickly choked with jumbo jets, blocking taxiways and forcing planes to park wherever space could be found. As the hours dragged on, the atmosphere grew tense. Passengers sat inside their cabins, frustrated, while crews and controllers struggled to manage the chaos on a fog-covered runway that would soon become the stage for catastrophe. The KLM crew, led by Captain Jacob Van Zanten, one of the airline's most senior and respected pilots, waited impatiently to refuel and prepare for departure. Van Zanten was not just any captain. He was a training instructor, a model of professionalism whose face appeared in KLM's promotional brochures. But that reputation, combined with mounting pressure, would later play a chilling role in the decisions made that day. Pan Am's crew, under Captain Victor Grubbs and First Officer Robert Bragg, sat idly on the tarmac, awaiting clearance to return to Gran Canaria once it reopened. As the hours passed, Los Rodeos filled with fog rolling in from the Atlantic, reducing visibility to near zero. Ground controls struggled to keep up with radio communications, which were often garbled or misunderstood. When Gran Canaria finally reopened, KLM decided to refuel at Tenerife, a decision that would delay their departure, but seemed practical at the time. Pan Am, meanwhile, was instructed to follow KLM to the end of the runway, backtrack, and take the same path to prepare for takeoff. However, the narrow taxiways and lack of radar made it difficult for the controllers to monitor the aircraft. By the time both giants were aligned for departure, the fog had thickened to the point that neither crew could see the other. At 5:06 p.m., with limited visibility and radio static filling the air, the chain reaction began. Inside the KLM cockpit, Captain Van Zanten, anxious to leave before duty time limits expired, began his takeoff roll without clear confirmation from air traffic control. His first officer, uncertain, repeated a partial clearance, but the message was misinterpreted. The Pan Am crew, still taxiing down the runway, heard fragments of the same transmission, realizing with horror that KLM was accelerating toward them in the mist. Captain Grubbs pushed the throttles forward, trying desperately to turn off the runway at the next exit, but the massive 747 couldn't clear the path in time. The fog was so dense that neither crew saw the other until it was too late. Out of the grey wall, the silhouette of the Pan Am Jumbo emerged, directly in KLM's path. Van Zanten pulled back hard on the yoke, attempting to lift off early. The plane's nose rose, its tail scraping the ground, sparks flying as it clawed at the air. For a split second, it seemed it might clear the Pan Am jet, but then the underside of KLM's fuselage slammed into the upper deck of the Pan Am aircraft with a thunderous explosion that shattered the silence of the island. The impact tore both planes apart in an instant. KLM's fully loaded fuel tanks ignited upon contact, turning the wreckage into a firestorm. The Pan Am jet was engulfed in flames, its passengers trapped inside as the cabin filled with smoke and fire. On board KLM, all 248 people perished instantly. The Pan Am crew fought desperately to save their passengers. In the darkness and chaos, flight attendants screamed for people to run toward openings in the fuselage. Some passengers, miraculously, managed to escape by jumping from holes in the burning wreck. A total of 61 people from the Pan Am flight survived, crawling through twisted metal and burning debris into the fog, their faces blackened, their clothes torn, their minds in disbelief. The rest, 335 souls, never made it out. The aftermath was horrific. Firefighters and rescuers rushed toward the scene, but the fog made it nearly impossible to locate the crash site quickly. When they did, all they found were charred remains of two colossal aircraft fused together in flames. Bodies lay scattered across the runway, the smell of burning fuel and melted metal thick in the air. For the people of Tenerife, the quiet island paradise had become a nightmare beyond comprehension. The investigation that followed would uncover a chilling web of miscommunication and flawed human assumptions. The tower controller's English was heavily accented, and both flight crews struggled to understand his instructions through overlapping radio chatter. The phrase, "You are cleared," was used ambiguously, leading Van Zanten to believe he had clearance for takeoff, when in fact he did not. The fog, poor visibility, and lack of ground radar at the airport compounded the confusion. Moreover, KLM's captain had been under pressure to meet company regulations and avoid crew duty time violations, which may have clouded his judgment. In the cockpit voice recorder, the final seconds were filled with panic. Van Zanten shouting, his first officer realizing too late what was happening, and the sounds of engines roaring just before impact. It was over in seconds, but those seconds became a permanent scar in aviation history. The Tenerife disaster forced the aviation industry to confront its greatest vulnerability: human communication. From that tragedy came sweeping changes that still protect passengers today. The standardization of cockpit communication, the introduction of clearer terminology like takeoff clearance, and the widespread installation of ground radar systems at major airports all trace their roots to this single event. The concept of crew resource management, CRM, was also born from Tenerife, emphasizing teamwork, questioning authority when necessary, and ensuring that no single voice dominates critical decision-making in the cockpit. But beyond the technical reforms, Tenerife left behind stories of human courage and unbearable loss. Survivors described crawling through burning wreckage, hearing screams fade behind them as they stumbled into the fog, their lives changed forever. Families across the world waited for news that would never come, their loved ones listed among the hundreds who never returned home. To this day, memorials stand on the island, simple and solemn, bearing the names of those who died. The runway, once the scene of chaos, has long since been repaired and repurposed, but its history lingers like a shadow. Each anniversary, relatives and survivors gather in silence, remembering not just the scale of the disaster, but the fragile humanity behind it. What happened on that foggy runway was not the result of malice, but of miscommunication and pressure, of moments where certainty replaced caution. In those few tragic seconds, 583 lives were lost, but their legacy reshaped the future of aviation forever. The Tenerife airport disaster remains the deadliest in history, a haunting reminder that in the vast skies and the complex choreography of flight, every word, every decision, every hesitation matters. On August 12, 1985, Japan Airlines Flight 123 prepared for what should have been a routine domestic journey from Tokyo's Haneda Airport to Osaka. It was a warm summer evening, and the Boeing 747SR, a special short-range version of the world's largest passenger jet, was filled with families returning home, business travelers, and vacationers enjoying the Obon holiday, a time in Japan when millions travel to reunite with loved ones. The cabin buzzed with conversation and laughter as 524 passengers and crew settled in for the short one-hour flight, unaware that they were stepping into one of the most tragic and haunting chapters in aviation history. At 6:12 p.m., the aircraft took off into the fading daylight, climbing steadily toward its cruising altitude. Captain Masami Takahama, a veteran pilot with over 12,000 flight hours, commanded the flight alongside First Officer Yutaka Sasaki and Flight Engineer Hiroshi Fukuda. For the first few minutes, everything was normal. Then at 6:24 p.m., just 12 minutes after takeoff, a sudden and violent explosion rocked the rear of the aircraft. Passengers felt a powerful jolt as the plane lurched upward and began shaking uncontrollably. In the cockpit, warning lights flashed across the instrument panels, and a terrifying realization struck the crew. They had lost control of the aircraft's hydraulics, the very system that controlled the plane's elevators, rudder, and ailerons. Without it, the massive 747 could no longer be properly steered. The cause of the explosion was catastrophic. The plane's rear pressure bulkhead, a critical structure that maintains cabin pressure, had ruptured mid-flight. The explosive decompression tore through the tail section, blowing off the vertical stabilizer and severing all 4 hydraulic lines. In an instant, Flight 123 became an uncontrollable giant, limping through the sky. The decompression sent a roar of wind through the cabin, sucking out air and scattering debris. Oxygen masks dropped, passengers screamed, and cabin crew scrambled to calm the chaos. In the cockpit, Captain Takahama and his crew fought desperately to regain control. Their training had not prepared them for this scenario. No pilot in the world could fly a jumbo jet without hydraulics. The plane began a series of wild oscillations, nose up, nose down, left, right, each movement worsening as the crew tried to counteract it. Using only the engines, they attempted a desperate improvisation, adjusting thrust power on either side of the aircraft to steer. It was crude, but it was all they had. Down below, radar controllers at Tokyo Air Traffic Control noticed Flight 123's erratic path and contacted the crew. "What is your condition?" they asked. Captain Takahama's strained voice came through the static, uncontrollable. For the next 32 minutes, the world watched as the crippled aircraft zigzagged over Japan, climbing and plunging in terrifying cycles. The pilots, exhausted yet determined, somehow managed to keep the jet in the air, communicating with air traffic controllers who scrambled to arrange an emergency landing. The nearest option was Yokota Air Base, a U.S. military installation not far from their position. Controllers urged the crew to head there, but amid the confusion and limited maneuverability, the plane overshot its path and began to drift north toward the mountains. Meanwhile, inside the cabin, passengers were living their final moments in unimaginable fear. Some wrote farewell letters to loved ones, scrawling words on napkins, ticket stubs, and scraps of paper. These letters would later be found in the wreckage, their ink blurred by tears. One note read simply, "Please take care of our children." Another said, "Thank you for everything." Flight attendants, their own faces pale with terror, continued to assist passengers, trying to keep calm even as the aircraft shuddered violently. The sound of wind howling through the ruptured fuselage mixed with the sobs and prayers of those on board. Despite the chaos, the crew remained astonishingly composed. In the cockpit, the flight recorder captured their calm, methodical discussions. They attempted every possible recovery procedure, from adjusting fuel trim to changing thrust ratios. The first officer read checklists aloud, even though many of the systems no longer responded. The captain's voice, though weary, never broke. He was determined to land the aircraft, no matter the odds. At 6:56 p.m., about half an hour after the decompression, the plane descended rapidly as it approached the mountainous terrain of Gunma Prefecture. The crew made one last desperate attempt to stabilize the aircraft. Witnesses on the ground saw the massive 747 flying low, its engines screaming, trailing white contrails that were actually vapor from leaking hydraulic fluid. Moments later, the aircraft clipped the ridge of Mount Takamagahara, disintegrating on impact. The fireball that followed illuminated the night sky. It was the single deadliest accident involving one aircraft in aviation history, killing 520 of the 524 people on board. Only 4 survivors were found, all women seated in the rear section, miraculously shielded by the structure of the tail during the impact. For hours after the crash, rescue operations were delayed due to confusion and nightfall. Japanese authorities initially misidentified the location, believing the crash site was inaccessible. By the time rescuers reached the scene the following morning, the mountain was silent, except for the sound of crackling fires and the faint cries of a few survivors calling for help. One of the survivors, a 12-year-old girl named Keiko Kawakami, was found hanging from a tree, injured but alive. She later described hearing other passengers alive during the night, their voices gradually fading as the hours passed. Her testimony would haunt rescuers and investigators for decades, knowing that faster response could have saved more lives. The investigation that followed revealed a chilling truth. The cause of the accident was not a sudden mechanical failure, but a flaw that had been silently waiting to claim lives for years. 7 years earlier, the same aircraft had suffered a tail strike incident during landing at Osaka Airport. The impact had caused significant damage to the rear pressure bulkhead. Boeing technicians repaired the damage, but the procedure was done incorrectly. Instead of using a single continuous row of rivets, they applied 2 separate rows, weakening the structure. Over the years, repeated pressurization cycles caused a crack to grow along the faulty repair. On that August evening, the weakened bulkhead finally gave way. The resulting explosion tore off the tail, and the plane's fate was sealed. The report placed responsibility on both Boeing for the improper repair and Japan Airlines for inadequate maintenance inspections. The aftermath of Flight 123 sent shockwaves through the aviation industry and the Japanese nation. Boeing overhauled its repair and inspection procedures, introducing stricter quality controls and redesigning structural components to prevent similar failures. Japan Airlines faced public outrage and profound guilt. The airline's president, Yasumoto Takagi, resigned in shame shortly after the investigation's findings were released. He later took his own life, leaving behind a note apologizing to the victims and their families. The tragedy became a symbol of both national mourning and deep introspection. In the years that followed, the site of the crash on Mount Osutaka became a place of pilgrimage. Families of the victims climbed the steep mountain each year, placing offerings, photos, and origami cranes at a small memorial built among the wreckage. Even today, pieces of the 747 remain scattered in the forest, quiet witnesses to the horror that once unfolded there. For the Japanese people, Flight 123 became more than an accident. It became a story of human endurance, sacrifice, and sorrow. The bravery of the crew, who fought for over half an hour to save their passengers despite an impossible situation, is remembered with reverence. Their calm voices in the cockpit recordings stand as a testament to professionalism and courage under unimaginable pressure. Aviation experts often point to this disaster as one of the most extraordinary examples of pilot skill in history. Despite having no flight controls, the crew managed to keep the plane airborne for 32 agonizing minutes, something once thought impossible. Their efforts bought precious time, allowing passengers to write messages and pray, granting them final moments of connection and farewell. The psychological impact of the crash was immense. Japan Airlines implemented sweeping reforms, focusing on safety, maintenance, and emotional support for families of crash victims. The event also reshaped global aviation standards, particularly in structural maintenance and repair certification. For Boeing, The accident was a painful reminder of the importance of precision and accountability in aircraft repair. Flight 123's legacy continues to influence aviation engineering and pilot training around the world. In every aviation classroom, its story is told not just as a technical case study, but as a human one, a reminder of the fragility of life and the duty of those who carry lives through the skies. Today, decades later, the crash still echoes through Japan's collective memory. Every August 12, bells toll at the foot of Mount Osutaka. Families bow in silence, their faces illuminated by candlelight. The names of the victims are read aloud, and the wind that sweeps through the trees seems to carry the voices of those lost, whispering through the mountain air. Japan Airlines Flight 123 remains the deadliest single aircraft disaster in aviation history. A tragedy born not from malice or carelessness, but from a hidden flaw and the relentless courage of those who faced the impossible. It stands as a solemn reminder that in the vastness of the sky, even the smallest oversight can bring down giants, and that every flight is a fragile balance of trust, precision, and human spirit. In the end, these tragedies remind us that behind every flight number and every aircraft tale lies a story of humanity, of passengers with dreams, of crews who fought until their final breath, and of lessons written in pain so that others may live. The skies, once stained with smoke and sorrow, became safer because of what was learned in those moments of despair. Every takeoff today carries the silent legacy of Tenerife and Flight 123, where errors were transformed into evolution and loss gave birth to progress. The echoes of those fateful days continue to whisper through aviation history, a solemn vow that such horror must never be repeated.